music a day to you this day of your time. How are you all? All right. All right, thank you. Once again, we thank each and every one of you individually and all of you together collectively for the co-creation of this interaction between our respective civilizations, and for giving us the opportunity to experience through each and every one of you another viewpoint, another perspective, another way that all that is has of experiencing itself within the creation that it is. We would like to begin this transmission, this day of your time, having titled it, The Metaphysics of Physics. And what we basically mean by this is that, as has been discussed many times from many different sources, the idea of physical reality is that it is a projection of consciousness. In a sense, it is like a dream. It isn't really out there around you. It isn't really solid in the classical meaning of that word. But the idea is that everything that exists in physical reality, in some way, shape, or form, begins within the consciousness as a resonance pattern, as a template, as a blueprint, if you will. And thus that blueprint, that energy pattern, is in a sense crystallized within the consciousness into the format that you perceive and experience as physical reality. Now the idea then is that, as we have discussed, and as have many of you realized, physical reality contains different kinds of reflections. The basic ones you would generally say are the positive and the negative, but then there is also the neutral, which is what makes physical reality not a duality, but a trinity. There is always the middle part, always the balance point. This is energetically what allows you to create the reality you prefer, because there is always going to be a way in which you can blend and balance the positive, the negative, coming from the neutral place, in order to generate whatever kind of an experience that you prefer or that you chose as a theme of exploration. But how this idea of the neutral place and the positive and negative energies that exist or are experienced within physical reality express themselves in the physical reality is quite fascinating. The idea of what you consider to be matter and the constituents of matter that make up your physical reality, what you would call the subatomic particles, so on and so forth, also do express this idea of the Trinity within their basic fundamental structure. First and foremost, most simply, you have, as many of you know from taking certain classes in your school, that an atom is generally made up of three components. You have the positively charged proton, you have the negatively charged electron, and you have the neutral neutron. Aptly named, don't you think? However, what you may not realize is how apt this structure is, how expressive it is in a very specific and precise way to the idea of the energy patterns that we've already described. Many of you may not realize that a neutron, if, shall we say, left to its own devices, a free neutron not connected within an atomic structure, actually breaks down into a proton and an electron. So the idea is that the neutral particle is neutral because it is made up of, in a sense, positive charges, negative charges, and it expresses these things and manifests these things as the two seemingly opposite elementary particles of the proton and the electron. And because it contains both charges, that's why it is also able to be attracted to the proton or attract a proton to it, as well as the electron, because the neutron, shall we say, has kind of layers to it energetically. Now, understand, of course, what we are saying is somewhat euphemistic, but it's a good way to illustrate the point. The neutron, being neutral because it contains both charges, does this in a particular way, sort of like a layer cake. Because the proton cannot be attracted to another positively charged particle easily, the neutron must attract it. If it is to attract it at all, it must have some kind of a charge with which to do so. So the skin of the neutron, so to speak, is actually negatively charged to attract the proton. But it is also in its body positively charged to also attract the electron. So it does double duty in that way and creates and gives structure to the concept that you call the atom. Now, because it is able to break down into the proton and the electron and a few other things we won't go into right now that are, for the purpose of this illustration, somewhat superfluous, you begin to get the understanding that the neutron, in a sense, is a little bit bigger than both of them. It has, in your scientific terminology, more mass than the proton. Way more mass than the electron, of course. But it contains both, so it has to, in a sense, be more massive than both, so that when it breaks down, there is a sufficient amount of mass to express the proton and the electron. So the idea of the neutral state, energetically speaking, in your life, in your experience as a state of being, is similar. The idea is that the neutral state contains the potential for both a positive and a negative experience based on the meaning that you give to the neutral situation that is there to begin with. Now, in another transmission coming up in what you would call your near future, we're going to go more deeply into the idea of exactly what we mean when we talk about fundamental neutral states. For that transmission will help you understand how to identify neutral states more clearly and thus be more capable of infusing them with the positive or negative meaning that will then result in the idea of a positive or negative experience. But for now, it is sufficient to understand that this neutral state, like the neutron, contains the potential for both, and it is actually exemplified in physical reality by the very fact that the neutron itself is capable of breaking down into both physically. Now, let's look a little bit at the electron. The electron is representative of the idea of the negative energy, and of course, when we talk about it as an energetic state, we're simply talking about the idea of that which is disconnective, dissociative, segregative, so to speak, whereas when we talk about the positive energy, we're talking about things that are integrative, expansive, connective, so to speak, as a mechanism. But also what's associated with the negative energy that we have discussed many times with many of you are the idea of negative beliefs. As we have said, belief systems, both positive and negative, must do something to perpetuate themselves because they're not really real. Physical reality is not really real. In a sense, it's a projection, it's a dream, it's an illusion. So the belief systems are designed to perpetuate themselves in such a manner as to make it seem as if the reality that they depict, the definition of reality that they depict, is actually real so that you can have an actual solid physical experience. But when it comes to the idea of positive beliefs, the positive beliefs are reflecting to you the true nature of your being, the true, powerful, self-empowered, creative, loving nature of your spirit, of your being, of your essence, of your existence. The negative belief systems, in a sense, have to work much harder than the positive beliefs to get you to buy into a scenario that is fundamentally not true about you. Because you are basically creative, positive beings, essentially. So in order to get you to have an experience that is negative, it has to tell you things that are fundamentally lies about yourself, and it has to reinforce those lies with every trick in the book that it can muster, every tool in its kit. Otherwise, you would see right through the smoke and mirrors and know that it is just an illusion and that what the negative beliefs are telling you about yourself has to be, by definition, false. So let's look now at the correlation, at the analogy in the electron. The idea of the atomic structure, as you understand it in your society now, is not so much the exact classical representation of a tiny little particle orbiting around the nucleus in a very clean sort of way like a planet around a sun. No. That's kind of an outdated, old-fashioned way of representing it. It's good as a general illustration. But you now know, your physicists now know, that the electrons sort of exist more in what they term a probability cloud. That is, you're never really sure exactly where it is. It's whipping around so fast. It's somewhere in this hazy cloud that surrounds the nucleus. Somewhere in there are a bunch of electrons, but where they are, we don't know until we take a measurement and freeze where it is. But then you don't really understand exactly what its path has been because you're freezing it into a static state. But when it's moving, you don't really know where it is at any given moment. So in a sense, it is similar to the idea of negative beliefs in that it creates this sort of ambiguous fuzzy cloud that you can't really get a grip on. And it fools you into thinking that there are certain things going on that are really only probabilities, really only potentials, and not really very solid at all until you yourself decide that you're going to take a particular idea, a particular definition, which is the same thing as an observation or a measurement, scientifically speaking, and in taking that perspective and taking that measurement, then you get what you designed the perspective for. You get what you designed the measurement or the experiment for. That's the result you get. So the electron does exemplify and does represent the way in which negative beliefs work, in that they're kind of fuzzy, you're not really sure what's going on, they tend to hide in your unconscious mind, so you can't make it easy to find them, so you won't let them go, because again, this is their way of perpetuating themselves, telling you lies and telling you more lies, and using tools like fear to prevent you from finding them, so that they can continue to get you to believe that what they're telling you about you is true when it's not. So that is a general correlation, whereas the idea of the proton, being the positively charged thing, being in a sense more easily observed because it is the very nature of the element you're looking at itself, it is the very identifying energy of the elements themselves, then it's easy for you to see that directly. It doesn't have to hide, it doesn't have to confuse you, it doesn't have to fool you one way or the other. It is just telling you what you are. It is telling you what is. It is showing you your nature. So when you're looking at an element, let us say, for example, gold, or let us say mercury, you are really looking at the protons. That's what you're looking at, because it is the protons that determine what the element is. So they're easy to see. But the electrons, those sneaky little electrons, very tiny, buzzing around in their little bee cluster cloud of probabilities. I'm over here. No, I'm not. I'm over here. No, I'm not. I'm over here. No, I'm not. Fooled you again. Shows you a direct correlation between the idea of the way the energy states themselves exist and the way that they actually crystallize down through your consciousness into the expression you call physical materiality. The trinary idea extends itself further because, as your scientists have discovered, or as they have created for themselves to perceive, even the idea of some of the so-called subatomic particles like the proton have other particles within them that you have called quarks. And those quarks generally also come in threes, which again shows you the trinity aspect of the existence of that energy. Again, the duality and the neutral place in between. This does not have to be completely absorbed at this time in this way. You don't necessarily have to have any kind of a physics degree to absorb and understand this. It is simply something for your consciousness to look at with curiosity, let it sink in, and let the idea of the energy states and the structures that they appear to create that you call physical reality have a lot to do with each other, are really just different expressions of the same thing. They're just different expressions of the state of being that is existence itself, expressing itself on all levels as that trinity. The only level on which such trinities don't exist or dualities exist is what we would call the one. That is the homogeneous one state where there is no differentiation whatsoever, but because there is no differentiation, there is also no experience, no awareness. It takes the all that is to be aware of itself. It's the first reflection to itself that there is the appearance of an other that creates that idea that starts splitting into the, well, there is this, and there is that, and there is this relationship in the middle. So really, the neutron and the neutral state, that give rise to the experience of the positive and negative sides, the proton, the electron. The neutron itself and the neutral state is actually more precisely the reality that you call reality. Whereas the projections that come from it are the reflective illusions based on the information you have put into it, such as a positive meaning or a negative meaning, a positive definition or a negative definition. But the neutron and the neutral state is actually what you are as an existence, as a reality, and everything is contained within it, and everything can be expressed from it. Does that make sense to you? All right. So, just let that sink in. It's a little bit of physics fun.